thin, restless chatter your great tit makes, the sound you've heard 1,000 mornings and never once stopped for, is far closer to actual language than almost anything else in the living world. Not birdsong, not the pretty two-note teacher, teacher. It rings out in spring. I mean the busy, urgent little stream of notes it makes when something is wrong. Because your great tit does not have one alarm call, it has a whole set of them. Different sounds for different enemies. It has one call that scientists have shown behaves almost exactly like a word. It reaches into the mind of another bird and makes it picture one specific predator. And, most staggering of all, this bird can put its calls together in a particular order to build what is essentially a short sentence. And if you scramble that order, the meaning collapses exactly as it would in one of ours. For most of the history of science, we told ourselves a comforting story, that words were ours, that grammar was ours, that taking small sounds and arranging them in order so the order itself carries meaning was the one thing that set human beings apart from every other creature on the planet. A little gray and yellow bird on your peanut feeder has quietly and without any fuss at all proven that story wrong. So by the end of this film, you'll know the different words hidden in that chatter. You'll know the single call that works like a name for a specific predator. And you'll know the experiment, one of the most elegant in modern animal science, that proved this bird uses real grammar. And I promise you this, you will never hear that little bird on your feeder the same way again. If you like the sound of that, take half a second now and tap the like button. It genuinely helps these films reach more people who'd love them. Right, let's begin. Let's start with the thing almost nobody realizes, because it's the foundation for everything that follows. That alarm you hear isn't one sound, it's a vocabulary. To our ears, a worried great tit just sounds agitated, fussy, a blur of scratchy, repeated notes with no obvious shape to them. But recordings slowed down and laid out on a screen tell a very different story. Hidden inside that blur are more than 10 distinct note types, which the bird uses on their own or strings together in combinations. And the crucial thing, the thing that changes everything, is that the call it chooses is not random. It depends on the kind of danger the bird has just seen. In other words, this isn't the sound of a bird panicking. It's the sound of a bird reporting. It isn't screaming help. It's specifying, as precisely as its throat allows, what the threat is and what everybody else ought to do about it. And once you understand that, your garden stops being a pretty backdrop and turns into something much closer to a conversation you've simply never been able to follow. Let me give you the two clearest examples, because you can genuinely hear the difference yourself once you know what you're listening for. Picture a sparrowhawk, fast, low, silent, slicing between the gardens at head height, the single most dangerous thing in a small bird's day. When a great tit spots a hawk in the air, it does something remarkable. It gives a very high, very thin, drawn-out call, a sort of pure, wavering seee. And that call is a small miracle of engineering, because it is built deliberately to be almost impossible to locate. Here's why that matters so much. Think about how you work out where a sound is coming from. Your brain compares the tiny difference between the sound reaching one ear and the other. Which one hears it first? Which one hears it louder? A short, sharp, broad sound with a clear beginning gives that system everything it needs to pinpoint the source, but a high, thin, pure tone that fades in and fades out gently gives it almost nothing to work with. There's no crisp edge to grab, no sudden onset to compare. The sound seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. So the great tit, in the very moment it most needs to warn its mate and its neighbors, has found a way to shout a warning across the whole garden, without telling the hawk where the shouting bird actually is. It sounds the alarm and stays hidden inside it. Every other small bird in earshot freezes or dives for cover, and the caller does not become the price of the warning. That is not instinct in the crude sense we usually mean. That is a solution to a genuinely hard problem: how to warn everyone without giving yourself away. And evolution has been quietly refining it for millions of years, right outside your window. Now hold that in your mind, because the great teat's second alarm does the exact opposite, and the contrast is the whole point. When the danger isn't a hawk streaking past, but a predator that's sitting still, a cat crouched on the fence, an owl roosting in a tree, or a sparrowhawk that's landed and perched, the great tit switches to a completely different sound. Not thin and hidden, but harsh, loud, sharp, and endlessly repeated. A scratchy, scolding cha-cha-cha that is as easy to find as the hawk call was hard. And that switch is not a mistake. It's a change of strategy, because now the goal is flipped. A hawk in flight can't be fought, so the message is hide and don't let it see me. But a predator sitting still can be dealt with, if enough birds gang up on it. So the loud, locatable scold is a rallying cry. It's the great tit calling for backup. And it works. Other tits come, blue tits come, robins and finches and dunnocks come, and together they mob the intruder, diving at it, screaming at it, harassing it relentlessly until the predator gives up on the idea of a quiet ambush and simply leaves. A cat that's been found out and mobbed is a cat that isn't going to catch anything, and it usually slinks off. So look at what this one small bird is doing. For a moving threat, it chooses a sound designed to be everywhere and nowhere to protect the caller. For a still threat, it chooses a sound designed to be pinpointed instantly to gather an army. Same bird, same few seconds of danger. Two completely different calls, each precisely matched to the situation. And it gets even finer than that. Researchers have found that the harsh, mobbing calls carry subtle differences, depending on exactly what kind of predator has been spotted, tiny variations that other tits appear to read. That, already, is more sophisticated than most of us ever imagined a garden bird could be. But it is the warm-up, because the next part is where a bird you can see from your kitchen sink walks straight up to the wall we built between animals and ourselves. If any of this has already changed how you'll hear your garden tomorrow morning, please do me a favor and drop a comment below. Even just the word listening, so I know you got this far. I read every single one, and it genuinely helps the film. Now, to see the most astonishing part, we have to travel, because the landmark experiments weren't done on our British great tit. They were done on its near-identical cousin, the Japanese tit, a bird so closely related it was until recently considered the very same species. And in the forests of Japan, a researcher named Toshitaka Suzuki spent years patiently, obsessively, decoding exactly what these calls mean. What he found is that one of them behaves like a word. Here is the call. When a Japanese tit sees a snake, and snakes are a deadly threat because they climb to the nest and take the chicks, it produces a specific, distinctive alarm quite unlike its others. A hard, rasping jar, and crucially, it gives this jar call for snakes, and essentially only for snakes. So Suzuki asked the question that separates a clever observation from a genuine discovery. When another tit hears that jar call, what actually happens in its head? Does it just feel a vague spike of fear? Danger somewhere, the way you'd flinch at a loud bang? Or does the call do something far more specific? Does it make the bird think precisely snake? And he designed a beautiful experiment to find out. He played the snake call from a hidden speaker when there was no snake anywhere to be seen. And at the same time, he made a small stick, just a plain twig cut from a branch, move in a particular way. Sometimes he drew it slowly upward along a tree trunk. Sometimes he pulled it along the ground with a gentle snaking wiggle. A stick, moving a bit like a snake. The birds that had just heard the jar call came down and inspected that stick, approached it, scrutinized it, treated it as a thing worth checking, as if asking, "Is that the snake?" But when he moved the very same stick in a way that didn't resemble a snake's motion, they ignored it. And when the birds hadn't heard the snake call at all, they ignored the snake-like stick too. The call, and only the call, switched on a particular way of looking at the world. Sit with what that means, because it is genuinely profound. The jar call didn't simply say, "Be afraid." It reached into the listening bird's mind and loaded a picture, a search image of a snake, so that the bird went out into the world primed to spot that exact shape, that exact motion. It was hunting the environment for snakes before it had seen one. The sound conjured the thing, and that, precisely that, is what a word does. When I say the word snake to you, you don't just feel a jolt. A shape appears in your mind, something long and low and moving. You could not stop it if you tried. The sound stands in for the object. It summons a mental image of a thing that isn't there. Suzuki showed that the tit's jar call does the same job in the same way. A bird smaller than your fist with a brain the size of a pea is using a sound that functions, genuinely, testably, like a piece of vocabulary. This was the first solid evidence that any animal other than us can retrieve a visual image of an object from a call alone. And I want to pause on that for a moment, because this is exactly the kind of hidden world unfolding in ordinary gardens every single day that almost nobody ever notices. It's the whole reason I make these films. If it's your sort of thing, I've been putting together a free guide to the garden birds of Britain and Northern Ireland, what they're really up to, and how to start reading it for yourself. It's completely free, and it's the perfect companion to films like this one. Right. So we have calls that work like words, and that alone would be one of the great discoveries in animal behavior. But Suzuki wasn't finished, because the tits do something more, something that trespasses onto the one piece of ground we were most certain no other animal could ever stand on. Grammar. Because these tits don't only use single calls, they combine them, and when they do, the combination can mean more than the parts added together, and the order the parts come in genuinely matters. Let me show you the specific case, because it's clean and it's clever. The Japanese tit has one cluster of notes. Suzuki labeled it the A, B, C notes, that broadly means watch out, scan around, be on your guard. And it has another separate note, the D note, that means roughly come over here to me. Two different messages doing two different jobs. Nothing strange so far. Plenty of animals have a handful of distinct calls. But out in the wild, the tits routinely run these together into a single string, A, B, C, then D. Be on your guard and come to me. And when a bird hears that whole combined phrase, it does both things in sequence. It scans the area warily, and then it approaches the caller, which, if you think about it, is precisely the recipe for mobbing a predator. First check the surroundings for the threat, then gather together to drive it off. The combined call carries a combined, ordered meaning that neither note has on its own. Now, here's the part that turns a nice observation into airtight proof. Suzuki took that natural phrase and did something the birds never do. He kept the exact same two calls, made by the same birds, but he artificially flipped the order. Instead of the natural ABC, then D, he played D first and ABC second. Same sounds, same information, if all that mattered was the sounds themselves. Only the order reversed, and the birds barely reacted. That is the whole ball game, and it's worth being clear about why. If the tits only cared about the individual notes, if the meaning lived purely in the sounds, then scrambling the order should make no difference at all. The message would still be in there. But it did make a difference. The natural order worked. The birds scanned and gathered. The reversed order fell flat. The birds treated it as very nearly meaningless. The meaning, in other words, wasn't only in the notes. It was in the notes and their order together. That is the definition of compositional syntax, building meaning out of the arrangement of elements. And this was the first time it had ever been demonstrated, experimentally, in a wild animal. Let that land. A gray and yellow bird, smaller than your fist, sitting on the feeder, outside your kitchen window, is not just making noises. It is following a rule about which noise comes first. So let's be honest and careful about the size of this, because it's easy to hear bird makes different sounds and completely miss what actually happened here. For most of the history of science, language was our last wall. It was the final thing we could point to and say, that is what makes us different. We gave up tools long ago. Crows bend hooks, and otters crack shellfish on stones. We gave up raw cleverness. Plenty of animals plan, remember, and deceive. But words, sounds that stand in for things, and grammar, order that changes meaning, those, we insisted, were ours, and ours alone. The bright line, the thing on our side of the fence. And then a small bird you can watch from your window climbed quietly over the fence. Calls that work like words conjuring a specific predator in the mind. Calls combined by rules. An order that has to be right, or the message fails. Now, and this matters, because overclaiming would be its own kind of dishonesty. This is not human language. It is vastly simpler. The tit is not composing poetry or discussing yesterday. It has a small, fixed set of these tricks, not the open, infinite system we have. We should not pretend otherwise. But it is, unmistakably, built from some of the very same foundations that our language is built from. And the truly humbling part is that it was never hidden away in some remote jungle. It was sitting in the chatter of one of the commonest, most overlooked birds in Britain, in plain sight and plain earshot, the entire time. We just weren't listening properly. So here is what I'd leave you with. The next time a great tit kicks off in your garden, that sharp, urgent, scolding chatter you've heard your whole life and always filed away as just a bird making a fuss, I want you to stop for 10 seconds and really listen, because that is not noise, it is not panic, and it is not nothing. That bird has almost certainly identified something specific out there, and it may well be telling every other bird within earshot exactly what the threat is, exactly where to look, and exactly what to do about it, in an order that has to be right to work at all. You have spent your entire life listening to great tits talk. You just never knew they were saying something. If you got something out of this one, leave a like before you go. It's a tiny thing, and it genuinely helps these birds reach more of the people who'd love them. And if you'd like to meet another garden bird that turns out to be far cleverer than it has any right to be, the magpie that learns your face and remembers exactly who has wronged it, I've made a whole film about that, and you can watch it right here. Until then, mind how you go and keep listening.